In this video you will learn how to use exception handling in ZAPTEST. In my first example I will define exception handling rule to stop test execution on any ZAPTEST error. In my script, the first step imports data table values from the external file. And if the file is opened in another program, ZAPTEST will throw runtime error and pause the test run. I can change this behavior by defining a rule for the exception handler. On the exception handling dialog, I press Add button. From triggers list, I select all ZAPTEST errors. I keep it applied to all scripts, and for the action I choose Stop Execution. Now I will save the rule and run same test again. Test stops without displaying runtime error. And the test result includes step for the triggered exception handling rule with status failed. In my second example, I will define exception rule that will be triggered by specific error generated by ZAPTEST. In my test script, I added reference to an object which does not exist in the object repository. During the test run, ZAPTEST throws a runtime error and pauses script execution. I will add exception handling rule to ignore this kind of error. In the new rule configuration dialog, I select specific ZAPTEST error, enter partial text of the error, and for action I choose Ignore and Continue. Now I will save the rule and run same test again. Test run completes without interruptions. And the test result includes step for the triggered exception handling rule with status warning. In my next example, I will define exception handling rule to stop test execution if a test object is not found by ZAPTEST. I modified my test script by adding validation step for non-existent object. During the test run, ZAPTEST will report object not found error for the step and continue test execution. If I want to stop my test when it fails to find any object, I need to define an exception handling rule. For trigger, I select object is not found. I leave empty object's name so the rule applies to all objects. And I choose Stop Execution for the action. Now I will run same test again and review results. The result includes step for the triggered exception handling rule with status failed. It also includes name of the object that was not found. In my next example, I will demonstrate how to dismiss random pop-up dialogs. I created a test script to save content of my notepad to a new file. When a file with the same name already exists, Save As displays confirmation dialog. I created a separate script to dismiss that dialog by clicking Yes button. In the new exception rule definition, I select application found trigger type. If the application object exists in the local repository, I can select it from the repository path. Alternatively, I need to browse to the custom test first, and then select the application object from the remote object repository. For the action, I will select Call Test and use Browse to include path to my second script. Now I will run my test and review results. The test result includes step for the triggered exception handling rule with status warning and steps of the second test that was called by the rule's action. If I need to run same test on a remote device, I cannot use a rule based on the application object as it applies only to local systems. Instead, I need to define an object-based rule. For trigger, I will select Object Found. Then browse to the object repository script and use Select to find the object in the repository explorer. For the action, I will select Call Test and use Browse to include path to my second script. Now I will run my test on a remote device using the mrun and review the test results. The test result includes step for the triggered exception handling rule with status warning and steps of the second test that was called by the rule's action.